Part two, we're going to briefly just go over some ideas from Jamaica Kincaid's Girl. So, published in the 1970s, Jamaica Kincaid is an Antiguan writer. I believe she now lives in the United States, but was born and raised in Antigua. I think, based on some context clues from the story, we can assume that the story is also set in Antigua. So be thinking about that as a space that would have also been marked by colonialism, just in the same way that I mentioned Achebe's story is, right? So we have this conflict or this tension between some of the native cultural practices that get mentioned in the story and then those which are maybe brought over into the space by white colonial powers or influences. Okay, so beyond that, right, if that's a more subtle theme within the story, the major one is all about gender, right? So we see what at first may appear just kind of a long string of confusing information, right, and orders. When you pay closer attention to it, it shows us that this is a list of advice or orders that are given by a mother to a daughter. And I think if you listen to the recording of Kincaid reading the story, that might help you kind of step into the voice of the character a little bit more. Unlike a typical short story, we don't have really any background information about these two characters. We just know that it's a mother and a daughter. So we have to try to infer what we can based on their dialogue, right? So the story is really a challenge in trying to understand anything more, right, about these two people based only on what they say, right? We don't know what they look like. We don't know about their histories. We don't know much about their relationship. So what can we figure out from the dialogue, from the actual meaning of these different pieces of advice or orders that the mother is given, and what can we figure out about the girl herself? So what you want to notice is there's two moments in which the text gets italicized and we get a break from this long string of advice that the mother is given. I think we can assume that these italicized sections are the places in which the girl herself is speaking. So she interrupts her mother only 2 times. Be looking at what it is that she says and think about if we can glean anything about her personality, about the way that she is handling all of this advice that her mother's giving her. Is she just going to take it? Is there going to be some hostility in their relationship? Is she challenging what she's being taught? Is this long list of tasks that she needs to perform in order to be a proper lady, does it frustrate her? Does she feel overwhelmed by it? You might also think about the mother, right? So what we can figure out based on the way that she speaks to her daughter, what kind of values she has, what kind of ideas she's trying to spread to the next generation. When I've taught this story in the past, everybody, of course, always wants to talk about the fact that the mom keeps calling her daughter slut, right? So we want to be thinking about, is this something that we could use to kind of condemn the mom, right? Is she strict? Is she, I think I say cruel in the questions? Or should we think about this, or maybe and/or, right? It could be both at the same time. But should we think about this as a lesson in the way that gender stereotypes get passed from one generation to the next? Does it tell us something about the way that misogyny gets internalized, right? That misogynistic ideas don't always come from people of another gender, right? They can go from woman to woman, and in this case, from mother to daughter. So be thinking about what you think that language communicates. You also, of course, want to speak back or talk back to the idea that she's calling her daughter a slut, right? We want to question that as a category that even has real meaning, but instead be noticing about the things that she says might turn her into a slut are all about walking and talking and dressing, right? They have nothing to do with sex at all. So it really shows us a lot of the way in which these categorizations are largely arbitrary, right? And they're connected with things that don't really have much root in what that term would actually mean. So think about the way that they're constantly talking about clothing, about walking, about eye contact, about talking, about cooking, about cleaning, right? So there's all of these things that the girl has to learn in order to become that perfect, proper lady, which could largely signify to us this idea, again, that gender is not natural, right? It's not something that's innate, but instead it's this whole list of practices that are cultivated over the course of our growing up, over the course of our development, over the course of our socialization. So I think that might help us understand a little bit about the way it's written as this long list. but also be thinking about what the effect was for you, right? So what was it like to read this? Was it overwhelming? Was that maybe the point, right, that she was trying to make? You might also, like I said, think about the two characters. How do you feel about the mom and her parenting style? Do we want to let her off the hook a little bit? Or do we think that this is just that Kincaid's just trying to show us that this is a harmful practice that's going to damage the girl? You might also think, and I leave you a question about this, about how the story would be different if it was about the male gender. And then finally, be thinking about, again, the sections where the daughter inserts her own opinion, her own voice, right? What do we learn about her there? I also give you a question about this line, I don't sing Benna at Sunday school. It does get repeated, right? So you want to always keep an eye out for things that get repeated because the author's trying to draw your attention to it. And just to clarify, so Benna would have been I believe it's like calypso music, so a native cultural music that would have been, something that the girl is growing up with from her native culture, as opposed to something brought in by British colonial powers, right? So why is it important that she can't sing it at Sunday school? Why does that idea keep coming up, right? Okay, so there's a lot to go on with this one. I've taught this story a bunch. It usually leads to really interesting conversations. So just because it's weird, right, you want to maybe spend a little bit more time thinking about it and trying to figure out why it's written the way that it is, but it usually does lead to some cool ideas. So I'm interested to see what you all think of it. All right, thanks.